It is time for episode 3 of our Japan guitar crash course. Let's dig in. We've been having a lot of fun making these episodes on some of my favorite guitar brands from Japan, as well as taking some suggestions from you guys. And so it is time for another installment in the series. The idea of this series is just to do a quick overview of some of the Japanese guitar brands that you might not know about and tell you a little about them. Today, we are talking about ESP, and we're going to talk about a handful of sub-brands of ESP. It's ESP Day today. ESP is a newer company in comparison to many others, starting in 1975 as a parts manufacturer. Within a few years, ESP would begin to introduce guitars under their own name, as well as the Navigator line. Like many brands, ESP produced their own take on the classic American Fender and Gibson designs through their Navigator line, while still pursuing original designs to their ESP line. Many of the initial ESP branded offerings would definitely cater more to the metal world, but then on the Navigator side, they would appeal more to those looking for something more traditional. Speaking on Navigator specifically, the price point was a bit higher than most Japanese-made American-style guitars, and they had much more in line with custom shop instruments than production-level guitars. Upon their initial release, a lot of the Navigator stuff would cost about twice as much, if not more, than a lot of the comparable Tokai or Greco guitars. Throughout the 80s, as well as producing their own guitars like many Japanese manufacturers, ESP would also become an OEM for many other brands, such as Kramer. As Kramer would land an EVH endorsement, their demand skyrocketed, which meant that they needed to expand to keep up with demand. In order for Kramer to produce guitars to their high standards, but in higher volumes, ESP was contracted to pick up some of the production. Which leads us to the first guitar that we're going to check out today. This is actually the oldest ESP-made guitar that we currently have in our inventory, and it's not even an ESP. This is a ESP-made Kramer JK2000. This guitar is from the 80s, right after kind of the EVH endorsement was locked in. These started being made, and these are great straight-ahead shredder guitars. This one has seen some modifications and currently sports Seymour Duncan pickups, which would have not been stock, but they sound great in here. Let's plug this one in and see what it sounds like. As someone who's not necessarily always drawn to this style guitar, I'm actually loving this. This is super stable. Locking tremolo stays in tune very well. This one's set up very easily. It plays even better. I love the neck profile on this. It's definitely not like super thin like you get with some of the more kind of shreddy guitars you'll find out there. This is nice. This is very comfortable. It feels very balanced, and I'm definitely not mad at whoever put these pickups in, as it sounds really great too. The zebra kind of matches the rest of the finish quite nicely. Well, this guitar is definitely doing its own thing, I would say, within the realm of guitars of this style. This is actually probably closer to something like a Fender than it is like an Ibanez. Definitely just feels like a perfect super strat. Even as a non-shreddy guitar player, this one definitely still gets my seal of approval. Over the years, the ESP brand would evolve and they would start many sub-brands. Some of these would be exclusive to the Japanese market and some of these would be for export. Many of these sub-brands deserve their own video, so I'm sure that we will get into more of those later, but I do want to talk about a few of them here. One of my favorite modern sub-brands of ESP is Edwards guitars. Edwards makes a fairly wide range of guitars, everything from ESP models like the Horizon to Fender and Gibson style guitars. The Edwards line started in 1992 when ESP would begin expanding their manufacturing outside of their factory in Tokyo. At this time, the demand for their guitars was starting to exceed what they could make by hand in their current factory. ESP would send raw materials out from Japan and have some of the woodworking and finishing work done in Russia and China. These guitars would then be returned to them in Japan for final assembly, setup, and finishing touches. These are mostly made exclusively to the Japanese market, so I had actually never seen these until I went over to Japan the first time. I think part of the idea of this Edwards line and this process seemed to be to make a guitar more competitive to other Japanese brands like Tokai and Greco without carrying that custom shop price like stuff from their Navigator offerings. Here we have one of those Edwards guitars. This model name is crazy. This is the E-LS-90LT. Obviously this takes close inspiration from the Les Paul Special. My kind of main guitar, if you will, is a TVL Les Paul Special, quite like this. So I really like this guitar. This guitar has kind of a slim 60s style neck and more modern Seymour Duncan humbucker, so not 100% faithful to like the 50s Les Paul Special that this visually represents, but I would say that this is a great blend of kind of classic and modern. and it makes for a very solid guitar. Very solid finish work on this too. This is nice, quite thin. After spending some time with this guitar, I can say that like many Les Paul Specials or Les Paul Special style guitars, this one is great. This one is no exception. The highlights for me are these Seymour Duncan pickups sound really great. They're pretty hot for P90s. They definitely compress a little bit if you really dig in. Overall, very solid. This is kind of what you would expect for this style guitar. Again, bit of a slim neck profile in here, so that's maybe not 100% to what you'd expect from the 50s, but otherwise, it's all here, and this is a good one. One thing that I love about not only this guitar, but a lot of the stuff from the Edwards line is you can pick up a used one for around the price of the kind of higher end Epiphone stuff, at least as far as their current offerings go. And I would say that this beats any of the kind of import stuff that Epiphone is making right now in basically every way. You even get the open book headstock, to Gibson's dismay. As well as producing this line, ESP had similar offerings under their brand Grassroots, but these guitars are much cheaper, with most of their modern production happening in Korea. Anytime that we visited shops in Japan like Big Boss Guitars, as soon as you walk in, you're greeted by a bunch of Grassroots guitars, and I always get really excited for a second that we're about to find a bunch of like junior and special style guitars made in Japan, and then I go, oh, it's Grassroots. It's not what we're looking for, but they are still cool for what they are. Within the scope of Grassroots, Edwards, and Navigator, ESP has basically positioned Grassroots to be the entry to intermediate level, with then Edwards being kind of the more serious level instrument, and then Navigator being their more custom shop type instrument. They of course also offer a ton of other sub-brands currently, and there's quite a bit of crossover between their different sub-brands within the Japanese market. Once you start factoring in the used market and how much other stuff there is out there under the ESP umbrella, it's just kind of crazy how much that this brand has had to offer over the years. Let's talk about ESP here in the US. Here in the States, ESP is most visible with their LTD line, a mass-produced import line of guitars that are really high quality at an accessible price point. Their custom shop ESP lines, E-II lines, and LTD lines see distribution here in the US. ESP does sell a number of USA-made custom shop instruments here in the US today, as well as Japanese-made guitars through their ESP Original line, which that ESP Original line also carries very like custom shop pricing by today's standards. ESP's standard production range has now been rebranded as E-II. So many standard Japanese production models are now carrying a E-II brand instead of ESP. This is a 2013 ESP E-II AP5 5-string bass. This is one of those models that previously would have carried a ESP brand, but by this point they were using E-II for their standard production guitars and basses. This thing is an absolute beast, so let's plug it in and see what it sounds like. This is a lot of bass here. This bass sounds absolutely massive. Comes stock with these two Seymour Duncan humbucker pickups, which I think sound great. And if you're looking for a 5-string, especially for heavier genres, something like this is tough to beat. Side note, we also have this ST2 from the E-II line. This particular example also happens to be from 2013. And this one actually sports DiMarzio pickups from the factory. I really like that you can find guitars from ESP with both Seymour Duncan pickups as well as DiMarzio pickups. I know some brands kind of like to stay loyal to one of those manufacturers, so it's cool to see them have both in their offerings. As both pickup manufacturers definitely offer their own thing. This guitar is quite shreddy as well. I would say definitely exists in a similar world to like the Kramer that we were just looking at, but the Kramer definitely has, I would say, a little bit thinner neck. This is almost getting more into Fender territory. The ESP brand has had a ton to offer over the years, and it's really interesting to look at their evolution and how they got to where they are now. I do actually have a feeling that their current branding with their E-II guitars, ESP Custom Shop, ESP Original, like all this different stuff, I do feel like they're gonna tighten that up a little bit and probably change their product offerings in the coming years. I would definitely love to see ESP offer just regular ESP branded Japanese made guitars here in the States for a comparable price point to other like high-end production level guitars, and not have to kind of gatekeep that brand to a custom shop thing and have this kind of confusing E-II that's in between. Like, I think for some players, they might see E-II and think that that's like a lower end sub brand, but that's really like almost their flagship brand, but it doesn't even carry the ESP name. And then you have obviously the LTD stuff, which I think does fit in a really nice place in the market. And I think within what they're trying to do with the LTD line, they're probably one of the best companies doing it. There's so much more we could dive into with ESP as well as their sub-brands, so I'm sure many of their sub-brands will be making appearances in future episodes of this series. And I'm sure we'll be doing some dedicated videos on some of these sub-brands as well. Let us know down below in the comments, do any of you guys play ESP or any of their sub-brands guitars? We'd love to hear what you got, and we'd love to hear your stories. If you want to check out any of the guitars you saw in this video, we would love if you checked out our site at flashphotogear.com, or we'll put a QR code on the screen here. I would say we always have at least a few offerings from ESP and their sub-brands on the shop, so we would love if you checked out our current inventory. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to hang out with us today and check out all of these guitars and the bass. We had a lot of fun. Hope you did too. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and all that good stuff, and we will see you in another video soon. Bye.